What's up, everybody? I'm Myron Medcalf, senior college basketball reporter for ESPN, ESPN.com, sideline reporter, radio host. Jeff Borzello covers college basketball for ESPN, ESPN.com. Jonathan Givony covers the NBA draft for ESPN, ESPN.com. Back again to talk about another big-time college basketball subject, and that's Duke. Duke after Coach K. We've all sort of had these Duke experiences. Givony, you've talked to a lot of NBA people about what they have on their roster and the potential there. Borzello, you've been to ACC Media Day, also had a lot of conversations, and I'm a few weeks removed from a trip to Duke. Like, I'll tell you what that trip was like for me. It was weird to be on campus without Coach K. And I've been to Duke a bunch of times, and just the entire vibe was different. And Jeremy Roach, who's, the returning leader of that team, said, yeah, everybody's pretty laid back now. It's just sort of a different atmosphere, a different environment. But what I also noticed, and I'm talking to John Shire, Jeff, was he sort of admitted, like, we don't have a guy. Like, this Duke team has a lot of potential. Obviously, Jeremy Roach, what he did in the NCAA tournament, a bunch of NBA prospects. But there's no dude, a Zion, a Boozer, Shane Battier, Jason Williams, like the history of Duke guys who, no matter who was on the court, you knew you could give that guy the ball, he can go and get a bucket. And Shire sort of likened that to the 2010 team, which won a national championship with him on the roster and didn't necessarily have that guy. Do you see any comparisons between those two teams and the ceiling for this Duke team, Jeff?
Well, the fact that you were even there on campus in August is a little bit of a change from the Coach K era.
Huge change.
Speaking of Roach, he's got huge expectations. I mean, not only does he have to be kind of the leader because he is the returning player from last year, but like he's always been, even back in high school and AAU, he was a really good point guard surrounded by other dudes. Like, and he's never really had to be that guy. And this year he's going to have to be. He's one of the few ball handlers on the team, one of the few playmakers on the team. And like you said, there's not somebody he could throw the ball to when they need a bucket late in the game and say, hey, go get a basket. And that was the thing, like last year, even, they were pretty young in spots, but like they had Paulo and they could just throw him the ball and say, he's better than anybody you have. He's going to get a basket. They did it with Zion and RJ Barrett. And obviously those two being on the floor at the same time ran into some early season issues, but they just don't really have that guy. I mean, their three best recruits, two of them are 7-footers, and the other one, Tyrese Whitehead, is hurt. And so I think they're really going to kind of figure out roles as the season progresses. And that's kind of, I guess, maybe my biggest concern going into the year is just how this all sorts out. The structure of their roster is a little bit different than it's been in the past. And, I guess you can if you do compare it to 2010, I mean, there was older pieces on that team. Singler was a junior and Shire was a senior. Nolan Smith was a junior. They don't really have those, a trio of battle tested guys who have been in Duke for 3 or 4 years. I think they're going to have to figure some things out as the season goes on.
Givony, on this roster, obviously there's a bunch of NBA potential, a lot of guys listed in your mock draft. Tell me about some of those guys and how good and what are the ceilings for some of those prospects?
Yeah, so I think the most important question we have right now is Tyrese Whitehead. How healthy is he? When can we expect him back? How slowly are they going to bring him along? Because this is a guy that,
if I want to interrupt, I did get some stuff from Shire on him, just on his timeline. And he said, quote, he's not far enough along yet to say exactly when he'll be back. And so this is an injury suffered in late August, and there's no timetable yet for return. He said it's going to be closer to the beginning of the season than conference play. But I mean, that's like a 2-month gap. So there's no definitive timetable. And like you said, and you're going to kind of go in more on him in a bit, they're not going to rush him back. They said, whatever it means, if it means missing a bunch of games, missing a couple of games, they're going to wait till he's 100%. So, it's really unclear right now when he'll be able to play for them. But
that doesn't surprise me, though, because Duke, they run their team like an NBA franchise. Yeah. First of all, in terms of the amount of information that gets out about medical stuff, it's very, very important to them and second of all, they're not going to rush him. They're going to want to bring him along slowly. When you're dealing with a foot injury, it's a week-to-week thing in terms of like what do the scans say. They have a huge performance staff, strength and conditioning, doctors, medical people, and so in terms of just the perception, I think they're gonna want to he'll be ready when he's ready, like the AJ Griffin situation last year was very similar, was he had a knee thing early on. He was healthy, but they kind of brought him along slowly, more so because he wasn't ready than because of medical stuff. So yeah, I think with Dariq Whitehead, that's going to be one of the big questions, like how, he missed a lot of time. And, so that was for freshmen in particular, making that transition from high school to college, playing at that level, the Champions Classic right off the bat. How ready is he? Because they, like you said, they don't have a lot of shot creation on this roster. They don't have a lot of playmaking. And, which version of Jeremy Roach are we going to see this year? Is it going to be, the guy who took over in the NCAA tournament, had some unbelievable games, was huge in that Texas Tech game, for example, helped lead them to the Final Four? Or is it going to be the version that we saw for, 3/4, 80% of the season, which was, kind of a guy who was really struggling to figure out what his role is. He was, very underwhelming as a shot creator. He struggled to make shots for most of the year. He looked small and pretty limited. And, talking to NBA guys, they look at Roach a little bit, more like that guy than the player that we saw in the NCAA tournament, who was so important for them, just gave them another dimension with his ability to go get a bucket to complement Paolo Banchero. So, Roach, huge question. Dariq Whitehead, the guy that I'm hearing has really been a revelation for them early on, has been Tyrese Proctor. He's coming off a tremendous summer playing with the Australian senior national team. Is absolutely beloved by, NBA Academy alum, so has some really good experience there. Was just okay at the Nike Hoop Summit in the spring and April. So a lot of NBA guys didn't exactly know what to expect of him going into this year. He actually reclassified. He was expected to be, initially enrolling next summer. And so he came a year early, in no small part due to, a huge need in the backcourt, so it looks like he's going to start. He could be a huge focal point of their offense. 6'5", very high basketball IQ, can play pick and roll, very good shooter, versatile defender, just a real leader on the floor. And so, Duke really.
Shire said Proctor, because just looking at stats and his international experience, like he had the reputation of someone who would make shots, who can make plays. Shire said his maturity in his defense have been kind of what stood out early, which is huge for a team this young. And another point on Roach, by the way, this is a guy, he also lost his starting job for the final 2 months of the regular season. He was coming off the bench before that tournament run he went on. He'd been coming off the bench. So, he's a lot is really on his shoulders. And if it's not him, I guess Proctor's going to be playing about 38 minutes a game.
Well, I think that's the unanswered question. I mean, and I watched him practice, and Proctor's was legit. I mean, I was impressed by sort of his maturity and poise. I mean, it's obviously very early, but you could see okay, I understand the hype about him. But the focus of everything was Jeremy Roach. Everything they did was okay, is Jeremy Roach going to be a guy who avoids the turnovers and can make sure they're playing, really poised, patient basketball? Defensively, he has to be important as well. I could see a Derek Lively playing almost like a Willie Cauley-Stein kind of role, but I don't know how far that takes you. At the end of the day, if there's 2 minutes left in a close game, you got to find somebody. You got to go to someone. And Jeremy Roach was that guy during the NCAA tournament, but can he be that over the course of an entire season is legit. I'm always going to think, too, about this team, and I was having conversations there. What happens if Trevor Keels comes back, right? That's always going to be the thing that I've thought about, man, that would be such an incredible piece if he were there as well, but he's gone. And now even more falls on Jeremy Roach to kind of be the leader of this team. So John Shire is also in this position, fellas, where yes, it's after Coach K. He's the first, guy to ever be on this campus in this role, I think since 1980, when Coach K arrives. You look at John Wooden, there were 4 coaches in 10 years after he retired at UCLA. You can try to compare maybe a Hubert Davis who, before the run to the Final Four, Hubert Davis was getting crushed by people who didn't think that he had performed up to what they had expected. And I think Jon Scheyer is going to face a lot of that same scrutiny whenever they lose a couple games in a row. Jeff, how do you think Jon is going to handle that? He told me, I asked him that question, he was like, bring it on. And I think that's one thing to say in August and September. It's another thing to say it maybe in January when it's really intense. But how do you think he's going to handle that?
You know, he's obviously he's not coming from an outside perspective. Like, you know, he's played for Coach K. He was an assistant under Coach K. So yeah, I think he had a firsthand look at, you know, what makes this program successful. And, you know, I don't think he's going to try to, you know, continue everything that Coach K did. He's already shown, you know, not that he's going to put his own stamp on the program, but he went outside the program to hire an assistant coach. You know, he hired Rachel Baker from, you know, former Nike person as a GM. I mean, those are things that Coach K might not have done. And so he's already kind of carving his own path. But I think that he's used to these expectations. Like, I don't think he took the job thinking, you know, we're going to sneak up on people year one. And what's made Duke successful the last, I don't know, 12 to 15 years at least, is recruiting the best players in the country out of high school and, you know, going out and winning games. And that's what he's already doing. I mean, he had the #1 recruiting class in 2022, his first class as a head coach. I mean, Coach K was still the head coach, but he didn't take any part in going on the road and watching kids and evaluating. That was all Shire and the other assistants. And now in 2023, he also right now has a #1 class in the country that could soon be passed by Kentucky. But, you know, so he's already kind of he's got the talent, which is a huge part of the recipe for winning at Duke. And so, you know, I think he's ready for these expectations. I don't think he was under the impression there would be anything but, you know, top 5, top 10, Final Four type expectations every single year, because that's what he had as a player at Duke. That's what he has as an assistant coach at Duke. Now, the other thing is, like, this non-conference schedule is not easy. I mean, they're going to the PK80. No. They've got the Champions Classic. You know, they have a couple of mid-majors to open the season, but like Jacksonville and Delaware were, you know, conference title winners. You know, they play Ohio State, and then, you know, they still have to play Iowa in the ACC schedule. So, you know, they're going to be tested early on and often, and we've harped on how young this team is. So, you know, we talked about how he's going to react to a couple of losses. That could come, you know, earlier than Duke fans are kind of used to. And so how he responds to that, you know, I think that's another kind of big storyline, or at least something to watch with them this year.
And Givony, how impressed are you that obviously there was a lot of talk that from people who thought maybe once Coach K leaves, then it changes the entire perception of the program for talent and maybe guys look elsewhere. But here he is bringing in elite recruit after elite recruit, even with Coach K gone. Like, how impressive have you been by his ability to keep that talent pipeline going after Coach K?
I mean, it's very impressive that they not only have they not lost a beat from the way they recruited, he's arguably recruiting at a higher level right now than Coach K did previously. I mean, #1 recruiting class last year, right now, #1 recruiting class next year. And you see a different strategy also in terms of the way that they're recruiting, in terms of just having shooting at every position. I mean, look at that the way that they put together this roster. They wanted to have 5 guys that can shoot on the floor at all times. We'll see how that translates in terms of Derek Lively and Kyle Filipowski making shots when the lights come on. But you look at next year's class with Mackenzie Mbako, Caleb Foster, Jared McCain, TJ Power. These are some of the best shooters in the country at their position. And then you look at this year's roster as well. It's you know, a lot of the same things. So I like that Shire is, you know, he has an identity, you know, and he has a vision for how he wants to play and the type of players that he wants to recruit. And, you know, we'll see how it comes together in reality. But, you know, that's what you're looking for. I think if you're a Duke fan, you want to see, okay, we're turning the page, you know, new coaching staff, everything, you know, brand new roster. You know, what type of identity are these guys going to have in terms of their style of play?
Jeff, we've talked about a lot of guys, a lot of players on this roster. Tyrese Whitehead is sort of the one where he's the unknown. I was down there at practice, and there was sort of this sense of, man, when he comes back. And then the question from there is that we talked about when he comes back healthy. You know, with that kind of injury, you just don't know when that will be. But if they get that Tyrese Whitehead, like the guy we've seen up until this point, how does that change the dynamic of this team?
Well, I mean, he's another player that can handle the ball. He's the guy that can make plays for others. He's really good defensively. I mean, he's a guy who was considered a 5-star recruit for most of the latter part of his high school career. And then as a senior, or at least going to a senior, and then his senior year in high school, he took off and he finished as the number 2 player in ESPN's ranking for the 2022 class. I mean, he's a projected top 10 pick, I think, in Givony's latest mock draft. And so, he's a guy who's going to come in and if he was fully healthy from day one, he'd be playing 30 plus minutes a game right off the bat. He's that good. And we've talked about the kind of balance of this roster, and you look at it, and without him, it's Roach, it's Proctor, and it's, what else are we doing on the perimeter? Jaden Shutt's a good shooter. Jacob Grandison, he was a, experienced shooter at Illinois. He's going to come in. I assume he's going to start or at least play a lot of minutes right off the bat. And then there's kind of an X factor being Mark Mitchell. He's drawn kind of rave reviews from people I've spoken to that have been to practice. Scheyer mentioned him, and he just brings kind of a different motor. What he also does, he would allow them to play with, more of a, I guess, kind of a classic forward instead of trying to play Lively and Filipowski together. Because playing 2 7-foot freshmen together right off the bat, it might take some time for them to develop a relationship and click inside. So, they have pieces, but Whitehead would, to me, provide a lot more balance to the roster and also just give them, that kind of X factor type of go-to guy that we've talked about a number of times in the past 20 minutes that they might be lacking going into the year.
Givony, what's your ceiling at the next level?
For Mark Mitchell?
Derek Whitehead.
For Derek Whitehead. I think he's a lottery pick. I think that, he's a two-way player. He's a guy who can handle the ball. He can pass. He's, high IQ. He's never been a particularly efficient player. I mean, and that's something that I've got my eye on. He had the green light at Montverde. He took any shot he wanted, but he was always there in the big moments when they needed him. This guy is a winner. He's tough as nails. And he's really young for his class too, which is very interesting. So, we'll see how quickly he gets back and what kind of role he plays. For me, the big question about this roster right now is Kyle Filipowski, because, he's a guy that, in terms of his role, he was expected to be, I don't want to say Paolo Banchero, but in terms of his skill set, a guy who can handle, pass, and shoot. That's what they wanted Kyle Filipowski to be. And my understanding of the intel that I've gotten so far is that he's way further behind where they were expecting him to be on the defensive end in particular, in terms of his toughness. There have been some question marks, from scouts coming out of there, like what kind of role is Kyle Filipowski going to have on this team? And, and that's where Mark Mitchell, I think, is going to be important, because maybe Mark Mitchell is a starting four-man. Mark Mitchell is 6'8", strong frame, really long arms, a mismatch in a lot of ways, just an okay shooter, just an okay ball handler. But, if he can give them some of that defensive versatility that they lack, then, he could really eat into Filipowski's minutes, because, Filipowski is a 7-footer, but he wants to play on the perimeter. He played at a fairly low level of high school, and just in terms of the level of competition. And, I saw him at the Hoop Hall Classic almost have a triple-double. He was unbelievable, just pushing in the open floor, getting his own shot. And, it was against, a low-level competition. And so my question is, how quickly can he come along? Because I think he's really skilled and really versatile. I had really high hopes for him going into the year, but it feels like it's going to take him some time. Maybe he ends up being a 2-year guy is the sense that we're getting early on, but we'll see how that materializes.
The other part of the Filipowski role is that they're also bringing in Ryan Young, Northwestern transfer. And, maybe he's not a top 15 transfer in the country, but he's 6'10". He's a senior. He averaged 9 and 4 in like 17 minutes per game in the Big Ten, like going against all the, high level big men that the Big Ten has. And I've been told from people that have been to practices, he might be the team's best low post scorer. So now you're talking about Lively is going to play. Ryan Young's going to get minutes. Mark Mitchell could take minutes at the 4. And so you're right. I mean, what is Filipowski going to get day one? What is he going to get during the Champions Classic? And, he might be a 10 to 12 minute guy for the first few weeks of the season while he gets his feet under him and kind of adapts to the physicality of the college game.
Yeah, he has to earn it. I mean, I watched him practice, and I guess what I saw with Filipowski was a guy who's overthinking everything. I mean, when you saw him defensively, Shire was doing a lot of work with him, just trying to put him in the right position. Forget about making plays. He just has to be where he's supposed to be. And you just saw sort of a young guy sort of really overthinking everything he's doing. And you hope in the next couple of months, maybe that changes, with some experience, some maturity, he learns. But I also think Shire's really smart to bring in some veterans like a Mark Mitchell who look great and can kind of help as those young guys are coming along. I think it's a really, really good blend. We're talking a lot about this year's team. We're talking a lot about even this 2023 recruiting class. But the story, if you think about Duke in the future, is that there is another Boozer who's going to be out there. And I know I'm old when, I saw their dads play, and, that was my era. And now their sons are, top recruits, which is what's happening with Cam Boozer. And it's just been remarkable, man. Jeff, you obviously have seen him. I've heard a lot of buzz about a lot of young guys, first or second year high school guys. But when I watch him play and I think about the term positionless basketball, this young man looks like sort of the poster for what that entails.
Yeah, so in the summer at the Nike Peach Jam, everyone was talking about Cooper Flagg, another 2025 prospect, kid out of Maine. And I watched him play, and he was terrific. Did everything. And I was like, oh my God, this kid is special. He's going to be a future number one pick. Maybe one of the best prospects in high school basketball right now. Then a couple of days later, he goes head to head with Cameron Boozer. And obviously they're different players. Boozer's a little bit more physical, but Boozer dominated. I mean, he looked just on a different level. And I mean, Flagg is special. And then you got Cameron Boozer, who I think is definitely the number one player in 2025. Just the way he runs the floor, finishes at the rim, rebounds, he's physical. Givony could talk to this, but, from what I heard at USA Basketball recently, he played, he was, outperforming older players in the paint. He's a terrific player. And 2025 is a really good class. And I think he's the clear-cut number one player in that class.
Givony, what's his ceiling? I mean, and who do you compare him to, if anybody?
Yeah, he was phenomenal at USA Basketball. He was head and shoulders the best player. He was the best prospect long-term, and he was also the best player, which is crazy considering that he's 15 years old. He's very young for his class. He's younger than a lot of the guys in the 2026 class, so he really should be a high school freshman. And his maturity is just unbelievable, just in terms of how polished he is. He never gets sped up. He never makes a wrong decision. He's an incredible passer. He can really guard on the perimeter and the interior. He finishes both hands. He can shoot. He's tough and physical like his dad, but he's a way more skilled player at the same stage. And I mean, his dad was honestly he was a rebounder. He was, he's a low post scorer. Cam can play everywhere. And so, obviously with his dad having played at Duke, they're the favorites there. I think they offered his twin brother, Caden Boozer, too, who is, not quite as highly regarded. But it's probably
good player in his own right, though.
Very good player, a very high IQ. Really knows how to play. He's, he's just shorter. He doesn't have the same, physical profile as Cam, but both really good players. And if they get those two and Cooper Flagg, then they might have the best class again in 2025, which is crazy.
Wow. So the pipeline continues after Coach K, and I think that says a lot about who Jon Scheyer is. I mean, I talked to Derek Lively and I said, what was it about Duke? And he said the relationship he had with Scheyer was really important. And I think Shirer's, reputation on the recruiting trail is certainly helping him as he moves forward to this next chapter. Let's wrap it up like this, fellas. What's Duke's ceiling? How far do you think they're going? If you had to pick both guys, where they'll finish in the ACC, where they'll finish in the NCAA tournament, how would you respond to that? Start with Jeff.
So I got the number 5 in my preseason ranking. So and second in the ACC. I think that might look a little high for the first couple months of the season, just because it's such a young team. But just once they get healthy, once they kind of acclimate themselves to the physicality and this pace of college basketball, I just think that they have so much talent. And they do have a guy in Jeremy Roach who's shown that he can play well in big games in the NCAA tournament. So I don't think they're getting back to the Final Four, and I don't think they're going to win the ACC, but I think they're one step away from both of those.
Givony.
Yeah, I think they're obviously a notch behind North Carolina, just, with all that the Tar Heels returned from last year. You have to give them edge there in terms of, winning the ACC. I think, it's probably down to them and Virginia, for like the second best team in the ACC. I mean, Virginia also returned some, and they also have a very good recruiting class coming in. They're going to be really good, So in terms of what their ceiling is, I would think that they're, a Sweet 16, Elite 8 team, unless, everything comes together in like a magical way. And, Lively, who we really haven't talked about on this podcast, but what does he bring in terms of the toughness and the physicality and just the consistency day in and day out? He was a guy who also played at a pretty low level of high school and was not like a dominant player by any means in a lot of the games that I was at. So, how he progresses as the year comes on, Whitehead, Filipowski, a lot of question marks here, but I feel like they have enough here to be in that Sweet 16 Elite 8 conversation.
Yeah, well, I had a good conversation with Derek Lively. I know he's eating 5 meals a day, trying to put more weight onto that frame of his. So he's really intentional about building that up. But to your point, just has a lot to learn. Very, very raw talent, but you could see him being a whole different player once March comes. I'll pick them third behind Virginia and North Carolina. I think in the ACC, I think Virginia with some experience, Tony Bennett in this position usually tends to shine. And I think they're a second weekend team. I'll say Sweet 16. Who knows beyond that? We will see. But Jonathan Givony, NBA draft for the ESPN, ESPN.com. Jeff Borzello covers college basketball and recruiting for ESPN and ESPN.com. Myron Medcalf, senior college basketball reporter, radio host, sideline reporter. Thank you for watching, listening, however you're consuming this incredible basketball content. Make sure you like this post and tell all your friends about this trio as well.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.